Good morning and welcome to the program. Much to discuss this morning, the latest intervention on the GST debate coming from the former Labor Prime Minister Paul Keating. Also today, this suggestion that an early election is a live option. That is what the Prime Minister said yesterday in the party room. It's being seen by some as just a threat to rattle the crossbench. Not so, according to senior sources that I've spoken to this morning, who say that the Prime Minister has genuinely not made up his mind on whether to go early or to wait till August, September later in the year. With me to discuss these issues and all the other matters of the day, the Resources Minister and Minister for Northern Australia, Ed Husic, and Labor front Josh Frydenberg.
No.
You can have that.
I just promoted you.
No, don't stop it. Go with your heart.
Okay. Well,
that's what you want
to
to
going to join the Liberal Party? All right. Here's a big story.
No.
Josh Frydenberg, the Minister for Resources, Labor frontbencher Ed Husic sporting a new beard. We'll get to that later, that important news. But in terms of Malcolm Turnbull not making up his mind yet, it genuinely hasn't made up his mind, according to the people I've spoken to this morning. Is that just him trying to make good on this threat, or is the government seriously willing to go in the next month or two?
Well, Kieran, the timing of the election is the prerogative of the Prime Minister, no doubt in close consultation with his colleagues. The double dissolution triggers are there with the Registered Organisations Bill, and let's just see what happens with the Australian Building and Construction Commission bill that was introduced yesterday into the House again when it comes up for voting in the Senate.
Are you worried it'll look like an empty threat if the Labor Party, well, we know the Labor Party's not going to support it, the Greens won't support it, you don't get it through, and yet you've made this threat and potentially not going to follow through? That would look quite weak.
I don't think the Prime Minister's making any threats. I think that's a misrepresentation of his statements. He's just saying that when you have double dissolution triggers, that is a live option. But when it comes to the timing of the election, the Prime Minister's also made clear that it is his expectation that we would run full term and that the election would be in the third quarter of 2016.
And it looks like it will be in large part on tax reform. Today, Paul Keating, as I mentioned in the introduction of the program, saying, well, there's a bit for both sides in this comment piece today, saying that necessarily an increase to 12%, 12.5% might not be a bad idea, Ed Husic.
Well, can I just quickly, I don't want to ignore the great PJK's comments because he's made an important intervention in this debate, but let's just go quickly back in terms of the early election speculation. They are talking up the option of an early election. Bring it on, because frankly, if they do go early and they haven't actually spelt out their plans for what they're going to do on a GST, then what the Australian public should know is that if they're going early, they're dodging a GST debate, and you know that there'll be an increase in taxation after the election. So while the claim is that it's not a threat, it's sort of saying, well, look, we've got a hammer on the table. How nice do you think the hammer is? I mean, you know that this is going to hit. In terms of the GST debate itself, I mean, Paul Keating has made an important intervention here in saying that this is not about reform lifting the GST by 50%. This is simply a tax grab itself to lift government revenue, and that it will not actually break behaviour, and it will punish low and middle income earners.
But he did say an increase of 1 to 2% might be justified.
And on the basis that it was purely hypothecated for health spending. But as we have shown on the Labor side, well, I was just going to get to the point. As we've shown on the Labor side, we think there are other ways you can meet the challenges facing government that do not require a 50% lift in the GST.
We haven't seen them yet.
We have. Well,
where are they in terms of covering the health costs?
I beg to differ. When you make that claim, we've identified $70 billion in terms of what can be done in terms of multinational taxation reform, superannuation concessions, tobacco excise, the emissions reduction fund. There's a whole host of things. And the point I make is, you watch this space in terms of how we fund the health demands of the states and the territories.
Most of what Ed Husic has said there, it's hard to disagree with. In the piece by Paul Keating.
But personally, I agree with him. He's right.
Well, a lot of it I don't agree with, but there is the fair bit that you'd have to agree with in terms of Paul Keating's analysis. The fact is, an increase in the GST is not tax reform; it is tax penury. That is nothing reformist about it.
Well, there's a certain irony in Paul Keating weighing into this debate, given that he was one of the original proponents of the GST back in 1985, and he had that battle with Bob Hawke at the time. Look, there's one thing I do agree with Paul Keating in his article. It is that the downturn in commodity prices has hit national income and that we need to curb government spending. And that's why the Turnbull government is reducing government spending from 25.9% as a proportion of GDP today down to 25.3% over the forward estimates. Now, Labor left us a $48 billion black hole and is blocking important savings in the Senate. So Paul Keating's right, we need to rein in government spending and the Labor Party needs to do its part, which it currently is not doing. On the issue, therefore, of what an increase to the GST would represent, Paul Keating is wrong to suggest that this is about increasing the tax burden on Australians and therefore giving government more discretionary spending, because Scott Morrison's been absolutely right when he's been leading this debate and talking about how the income tax burden is growing on the average income earner, with the average income earner going into the second highest tax bracket next year.
Can you justify?
This is part of the whole
that's
debate.
fair enough. That's part of the debate. But can you justify a change in the GST simply to deal with bracket creep? Surely you need a whole comprehensive argument to say this is going to be the bottom line in terms of the economic growth dividend as well. Otherwise, when you look at compensation for those on welfare and so on, you're just locking in higher payments down the track.
Well, as Malcolm Turnbull has rightly said too, there will be a comprehensive suite of tax reforms that we'll take to the next election, and that will be part of the narrative explaining how this will boost growth and jobs, because this is not tax changes for the sake of just simple tax changes. This is about how to produce a better dividend for the Australian economy. Now, globalisation, digitalisation, they're all having their impact on the Australian economy, and as a result, we should be reassessing our overall tax.
Well, this is certainly something I've been picking up from Liberals on the backbench, that this is that they're not necessarily convinced about the need to lift the GST. But Scott Morrison's got a couple of working groups where his advisors are going to be trying to bring them along for the ride in terms of the tax reform. If the government can detail a clear narrative and economic modelling that shows this is going to boost economic growth
and jobs,
and jobs, if they can do that, that's a compelling case, particularly when you've got individuals on incomes, low incomes and average incomes going to be compensated, you would think, handsomely in all of that.
Sure, we'll see how they go on the David Copperfield Act. I mean, they need to be able to convince people that it's a great idea that to cut tax, you need to pay more tax, because that's effectively what they're saying. They're saying, if you want an income tax cut, this is the federal coalition is saying, if you want an income tax cut, you need to pay more on the GST. This debate started, mind you, as an argument about we need to look at the GST as a way to meet our commitments to the states and territories on the $80 billion of school and health funding cuts that were triggered by the Abbott government, still supported by this government. So it's gone from that to now being purely a play on income tax reduction or dealing with bracket creep, which has horrified the states. And so we are not having a fair income tax debate. They might be having these working groups on the side, but maybe instead of having working groups on the side, they can come out publicly and say what they actually intend to do instead of catering messages to different audiences. But is there much clarity in the Labor position? Because if you look at what your argument is, it's about equity. If you look at one of your biggest revenue measures, it's the tobacco excise, which is going to hit the poorest the hardest. It's a flat tax, a flat hit, and those that smoke are going to cop it. Yeah, and what also hits the poorest the most is the scourge of cancer and the impact that smoking has on people. I mean, we have said all along...
But they can't give up overnight, and you're just basically using that blunt instrument, which is as flat a tax as you can get.
We are happy to see less revenue achieved through this excise if we see more people that are healthier as a result of it, right? Now, hang on a second. You had a very extensive go. So we're more than happy to see that, but we argue that you need to find a way to meet commitments by making a tough stand on that. We have spelt it out in a way that few oppositions, and certainly not these guys when they were in opposition, spelled out and took some tough measures and have led the debate on a number of things, be it multinational tax reform and been pushing the government on that, or superannuation concession.
Let's move on.
We are having a comprehensive tax debate, contrary to what Ed has said. Unlike when Wayne Swan commissioned Ken Henry to do a review and ruled out the GST as part of that equation, Australia's third largest tax, by the way, we have said all things are on the table, and I think that's been welcome. The fact that a Labor Premier like Jay Weatherill has weighed into this debate with Mike Baird, and the fact that, you know, Labor shadow ministers and Bill Shorten himself have then hopped into Jay Weatherill for actually having a contrary view to their ideological position, their partisan political position, has been very interesting.
I want to talk about the super concessions though, because there's a story in the front of the Australian. It's another element to the news poll. A majority, clear majority of those surveyed support taxing the super concessions to the wealthy. The question I want to put to you is, if everything's on the table, why is the government blinkered when it comes to the interest earned by those with millions of dollars in their super accounts, and yet you're willing to hit people who are earning more at the younger ages, trying to build their nest egg? You're hitting them on the way in. They don't have anywhere near as much, many of them, as those with millions in their accounts, and yet you're not willing to tax people earning interest, hundreds of thousands of dollars of interest on millions in their super accounts. Why not?
Well, firstly, when Labor put forward their proposals at the time, I was Assistant Treasurer, and they were disputed in terms of their modelling projections because it was going to hit a whole range of people because of the fluctuations of people's annual returns within their super funds, because stock markets go up and stock markets go down. So it was actually going to hit a whole range of people that the Labor Party pretended that it wouldn't. Now, as for future changes in super, I'll leave that to Scott Morrison and the Prime Minister and others.
But where's the equity if you're only looking at the money going in, as opposed to those who are earning a lot of interest on millions in their super accounts now? They've already got the money in their super accounts, and yet people trying to build it, you want to slap them?
Look, Scott Morrison has said that, you know, we're looking at the issue of super. There's been plenty of voices in that debate. We're not ruling in, we're not ruling out. There's still
that's positive,
and yet
you'd welcome that.
Well, and yet the concession that is set aside, the money that is foregone by government to allow these taxation concessions on wealthy superannuants, the scale of that demand on government coffers will outstrip in a couple of years what is paid through pensions. And we were saying, we had the temerity to say that if you're drawing in from your superannuation $75,000 a year, if you go above that, we'd start, taxing that. And we had the squeals and the horror from the other side, which are now, they're now basically moving with the public acceptance of what Labor has put on the table, which is these concessions are too generous, they're costing government too much, we need to find other ways to rein in spending, and this is one very important and viable avenue to take to do just that.
Let's take a quick break on AIM Agenda. Back in just a moment with Josh Frydenberg and Ed Husick.
Water will kill a child today. Water thick with animal and human waste. It's the only water they have. Why? Can someone tell Cass's mother why he has chronic diarrhea? Again. He's sick and dehydrated. He might die. For an innocent child to die from dirty water in this day and age is just not right. But it's not just one child. It's 1,400 children every day dying from dirty water and poor sanitation. Some things in life, are just wrong. It's not much to ask, is it? Clean water. We will work with communities to bring them safe, clean water. Water free from the filth and bacteria that causes diarrhea and fatal diseases. Drinking filthy water or die of thirst. What choice is that? Please call us now on 1800 601 220 or go to wateraid.org/au and give $10 a month to stop children like Cassa dying.
If something were to happen to you,
how would your other half cope financially? What about your children's future?
how secure would your family's financial future really be?
At Real Insurance, we promise to look after your family if you no longer can, with easy-to-get life insurance. Your family can then have financial support of up to $1 million when they need it most. It's easy to apply for real life insurance, over the phone with no medicals or paperwork required. And to say thanks, you'll get back 10% of the premiums you've paid after the first 12 months of your policy. Remember, one simple phone call is all it takes to secure your family's financial future. Plus, if you call now, you can win a year's worth of groceries for you and your family.
If you have a family that depends on you,
make sure they're all provided for.
Call Real Insurance now on 1300 303 459 and get a free quote, or search Real Life Insurance.
Discover more possibilities and embrace life's adventures in the all-new BMW X1.
There's more than 1,000 Ladbrokes cash-in news agents right throughout Australia. Just press Find a Store on your cash-in page and deposit your way with Ladbrokes.
Right now at Bridgestone Select, when you buy 3 Supercat or selected Bridgestone Turanza tyres, you'll get the 4th for $10. For tyres and auto service you can count on, you're always in safe hands at your local Bridgestone Select.
This is AM Agenda. It's good to have your company with me this morning. The Resources Minister, Josh Frydenberg, Labor frontbencher Ed Husic, who likes to interrupt a lot. Ed,
sorry about that. Well, I did it again, didn't I?
It's live television.
Again.
This is not a warm-up.
It is his birthday, and for that reason, give him some indulgence.
He's 25. Happy birthday, Ed.
Thanks, mate. Birthday boy. I get to interrupt.
You do get to interrupt, and
He still gets asked for ID too.
That's why he's
I
grown
get to
the
do
beard.
this on live TV too.
Let's look at the few other issues before we can gee up you on your birthday and turning 46 at the end of the program. But on same-sex marriage, I want to ask you about that because Terry Butler, your colleague, wants to bring on a vote, but that's not going to happen with the numbers in the lower house the way they are. This is just an effort to try and get this a bit more coverage.
No, I don't think so. I think Malcolm Turnbull has said before he became Prime Minister, he indicated that the Parliament was well equipped to deal with this matter and should, and certainly a number of us feel that way. Why go through the expense, over 150 million plus, on a plebiscite when the Prime Minister, before he got into that position, gave everyone the indication that he thought, let's get it done.
Yeah, but he's got a party that isn't unanimous in that view, so why not reach the compromises they've done? And to you on this issue, doesn't it give that matter greater certainty if you've got the stamp of approval of all the Australian people?
I think the genuine fear of a number of people is that this plebiscite becomes a very divisive issue and pits Australians against each other and makes us potentially be subjected to some pretty harsh stuff, and that we've said for quite some time the Parliament should make the decision. And I guess the bigger thing is, Kieran, it underlines the concern that the growing concern people have about Malcolm Turnbull, that he said one thing to get into office and is doing something else now.
Your thoughts just quickly? We've got a few other things to get to.
Oh, look, I've made my views publicly known on the issue of gay marriage. I think the plebiscite was a good way forward after a very sort of healthy and constructive and well-mannered debate that we had in the party room. I think once the result of that is in, it'll come before the Parliament, and it's likely gay marriage will be passed.
But in the short term, the lower house vote from Terry Butler, that's got no chance.
I think that's just a stunt.
But even if the plebiscite goes through, there's another growing concern that there'll be coalition representatives within the Parliament that won't respect the will of the people.
So we can discuss this.
That's their individual position.
We've got many months to discuss this as it continues to simmer away, this issue. But on the Nauru offshore processing, a High Court challenge, it's going to be the ruling in the High Court mid-morning this morning. What are the implications here?
Look, let's just see what happens after 10 a.m. Peter Dutton will have more to say about that. But what he has underlined, and I think this is a really important achievement of this government, is the ability, through stopping the boats and the stronger border protections, to stop thousands of lives being lost at sea. We've been able to remove many of the children from detention. It got to a peak of 2,000, Kieran. It's now down to 80, and Peter Dutton is trying to bring that down to 0. Yep. And we've closed 13 of the 17.
Ed Husic, that would be a humanitarian dividend if it was brought down to 0. The number of children in detention is what we all hope for.
Well, we moved the very difficult decision in terms of when Prime Minister Rudd in July of 2013 announced the arrangements that have been secured with PNG. For instance, in terms of offshore processing, this was a difficult decision within our side of politics, but a number of us said this was an important decision to take for those humanitarian elements. I think the overarching concern now is that it's very hard to hold people together for a lot of people who genuinely do not like offshore processing. They have been deeply concerned about the management of the facilities under the Abbott and now Turnbull government. And the biggest threat to this avenue is that if there are more concerns about the way in which people are treated while they're there, it will undermine offshore
Okay,
processing. It's an important element that needs to be
We've got
dealt
more
with.
coverage throughout the day on that issue. And to wrap up this morning, we're going to turn our attention to the Iowa caucuses, the first in the marathon race for the US presidency. Ed Husic, you spent a bit of time in the United States over the summer. What's the mood like? It seems the anti-establishment forces are very strong, although Rubio, your lookalike, he... well, not with the beard, but he does look a bit like you without
Nick
the beard.
Champion says I grew it just to distinguish myself
From Marco
him.
Rubio, that's right. But he did well. He almost matched Trump with 23% of the vote. That's given him a lot of momentum.
Well, the feeling on the ground has been one of disbelief and people searching for answers as to why Trump has been able to achieve the degree of notoriety and success in polling numbers that he has. And one of the things, someone had put to me is that there's this real uprising occurring where people feel with the economic conditions in the States, they're not getting ahead, wages stagnant, growth stagnant, yet the very well off are doing exceptionally well and are able to engineer outcomes because of their control of Congress that entrench that even further. So people want an outsider candidate like Trump. People want an outsider like Bernie Sanders.
Sure.
And so
You're
the
a
Iowa
Bernie Sanders
caucus,
fan, aren't you?
Yeah, Colonel Sanders, yes. Yes, absolutely. You've seen my waistline. I've downsized from a six-pack to a one-pack.
You and Chris Bowen spend more time in the gym than in the park.
No, he does. He's very aerodynamic. You can put him in a wind tunnel now and see all the...
Let's hear Josh's take on this, because the numbers are all over the place in terms of the Democratic result in Iowa. Dead heat, pretty much.
Well, a couple of things.
What do you take out of it?
Well, a couple of things. Firstly, I think the whole primary system leads to a narrow casting of the message by the key candidates. And so they're playing to the extremes of their party effectively. And when you get to the presidential race, the message will then have to be more targeted towards the centre. And so I think what you're hearing from a Cruz or a Trump today, or indeed a Rubio, would have to be modified were they to be the successful Republican candidate. I think the Democrat side is very interesting because I think probably Rubio may come through the middle here, and Ed might be in demand for some comedy shows. But when you look at the Democrat side...
Did you say might?
It might. If Bernie Sanders really gives Hillary Clinton a run for her money, you may see a Bloomberg come in from the side here, or even a Joe Biden. And they may see an opportunity. Bloomberg is to run as a Democrat, Biden as currently the vice president. That could be a really interesting dynamic.
Or if you talk to Ross Cameron, it's Al Gore, is the outsider.
It's going to be a marathon regardless, but yeah, just a minute left. But again, happy birthday, happy birthday, Ed Hughes. You got an image of you yesterday on the basketball court with this great T-shirt. Did you pick that up in the States? This T-shirt?
It was. It was.
Don't bro me till you know me.
That's it. Oh, well, I was going to say cool set bro, but...
Was it a tank top or not?
There we got it. Don't bro me till you know me. I love it.
That is... There you go.
You
and you said I might be in demand for comedy.
Well, Dave Letterman and you go way back, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. We've got to go to a break. Happy birthday, bro.
Thank
Quick
you
break,
very
back
much.
in just a moment.
Don't bro me till you know me.